A very warm welcome to everybody that's joined us in the room, and to Emma and colleagues. This is our first Social Work in Disasters forum. We're hopefully going to be running a few more of these, and today we've got Emma and colleagues joining us from Essex County Council, who are going to be talking to us about the role of the key worker and providing a case study around that, particularly linked to the role of social workers in disasters. Oops. If you've just joined, if you're okay to pop us on mute, that's great. That's great. Thank you. Yeah, so as I was saying, so Emma and colleagues are joining us from Essex County Council, from the crisis support team, to deliver a session today that's focused on the role of the key worker, providing a case study, and also looking at how within that work they've adopted the BASW and ADASS joint statement and the recommendations that are contained within the statement about recruiting and training key workers. So Emma, are you okay to introduce yourself and to bring colleagues in? I'll go on mute now. Have a great forum, everybody, and I'll come back in as and when you need me. And just to say, I think the slides, we could make those available as a PDF version, can't we, to anyone that's joining today? So we'll make sure that they're, excuse me, sent out after the session. Okay, over to you, Emma and colleagues. Thank you.
Thanks, Liz, and thanks for inviting us. We're really pleased to be here. My name's Emma Dodgson. I work for Essex County Council's Emergency Planning and Resilience team, and I lead on planning for the human aspects of emergencies, which is supporting survivors or families of those missing, injured or killed, or the wider community. And I've been doing that for over 20 years now. There's a few of us from Essex County Council going to be delivering your forum today. And so we'll have introductions with our cameras on, and then I'll share some of the slides. I would say please use the chat. So whilst I've got the slides up, my colleagues will be monitoring the chat. If there's a really important question that's really relevant, I'm happy to pause and answer that and build it in, or we can answer them at the end. So please do use this as a chance to engage, whether you've got a question or a comment from your own respective role or organisation, because I think that would really help with the forum and make it really engaging. So I'll introduce one of my colleagues, Caroline Knight.
Hello, afternoon everyone. I'm Caroline Knight. I am a service manager in Essex County Council in Children's Social Care. I have responsibility for the emergency duty service, and part of that is that I also have the privilege of chairing the crisis support team in Essex. So that being, I'll be supporting Emma with some of the presentation today.
And Nicola Park.
Hi everyone, my name is Nicola Park. I'm the lead for policy, business planning and commercial for Essex County Council Children's Services. I have the lead for emergency planning for the service, and in that capacity I have been supporting Emma to get the new iteration of the crisis support team for Essex established, and particularly supporting getting approval from senior management to the recruitment of key workers, and actually encouraging that recruitment.
Thank you. And Annabelle Butcher.
Hi, I'm Annabelle. I am a team manager in adult social care in Essex County Council. I'm also a social worker, and I am a newly sort of recruited key worker for the crisis support team in Essex. So I'm kind of here to sort of talk about my experiences with it.
Thank you. And we may have another colleague joining us a bit later, Lorette Robertson, who's one of our human aspects champions and works in the Children and Families Service as well. So she apologises she can't be here at the moment. She hopes to join us a bit later. Okay, so I'm just going to share my screen, show some slides. So bear with me, Jabal, I'll just bring them up for you. Okay, so I'll start off with a few facts about Essex. So we border London in the southeast of the UK, and we're a mixture of built up and rural areas and a population of 1.5 million residents. And in terms of local authorities, we have 15. So we're the county council, and we have 2 unitary councils in Essex. We have 14 district and borough councils and a city council as well. So it can make emergency planning a bit of a challenge, as a lot of the government guidance refers to the local authority without referring to their different types or responsibilities. It's quite a large county with many risks, including a 350-mile coastline, lots of rivers, 2 airports, commuter train lines, a large road network and many major industrial companies. And one interesting fact I learned recently was we also have the most haunted house in England, apparently, but that's not on our risk register, however. So I'd just like to set the context. I usually start my presentations with this important quote from Disaster Action, which is a charity of survivors and bereaved from emergencies. And it really helps ground me and remember how important it is planning for the human aspects of emergencies and training people, because the last thing we want to do is cause more harm. So they suggest it's often what happens in the aftermath of the emergency that causes the most distress in terms of the policies and procedures that happen afterwards and how people are treated. So for me, it's really important to remember this. And our team has done lots of great work with disaster action over the past 20 years. And I know that BASW have done the same. And we know how important that is. So setting the context, I'll take you back to 2004. We set up a multi-agency crisis support team. So there's me, all fresh-faced and keen. I'm still keen, but maybe not as fresh-faced. It was a multi-agency scheme with a team of 80 volunteers called crisis support workers. And we recruited those from many partners across Essex, and they were trained to deliver practical and emotional support for survivors and families of those missing, injured or killed. And we used that. Over the past 20 years, we've used that scheme for 9 emergencies, and we've been on standby for 8. Now, I share this slide, and it is a bit busy, but as we mentioned, we will share them so you can have a look at this in slower time. But this was prepared by the Human Aspects Group of the Emergency Planning Society, and it's evidence-based. So if we get it right, a good response is likely in terms of providing support to people affected. And leaders really set the tone for this and ensure that these top key principles in the human aspects of emergencies are embedded in their organisation's emergency planning and response. And we always had the crisis support team and planned it, delivered our support services with these 10 key principles in mind, particularly making us people-focused, focusing on responder welfare, which is super important, and also what we're there to deliver, which is a proactive and sustained outreach and support. So we had our multi-agency scheme, and then in 2016, we developed our first multi-agency human aspects plan, which had a much wider remit and focus. And that's when we introduced the role of the humanitarian assistance lead officer, learning from the work that was happening in London. And that is another of your recommendations in your joint statement. So we were pleased to see it in there because it lets us know that we're along the right track. So when your joint statement first came out, we did some work in Essex County Council and our unitaries to ask them to consider the key worker role. And it came back quite strongly that there was no appetite for it at that time. I think with all the focus there had been over the recent years on Brexit planning, COVID and budget restrictions, it had really taken its toll, and we knew what a stretched service that social care was. Then in 2023, for various reasons, we were about to lose our multi-agency crisis support teams. And this gave Essex County Council a quandary because we had to question, well, what is our capability now for the delivery of crisis support and early humanitarian assistance? Humanitarian assistance is one of our key priorities in our Essex County Council emergency response plan. We had some great crisis support workers that we didn't want to lose. We were learning more and more about the role of social workers in emergencies, especially the learning from Grenfell and other recent emergencies. So our leaders agreed to us delivering a scoping project, looking into the options of a new delivery model. And our scoping project surprisingly came up with 8 different options, 4 of which seemed most appropriate to Essex and our risks. One of those options was to bring our crisis support team for Essex in-house and adopt a hybrid model where we'd retain our crisis support workers who are purely volunteers, but we'd change it so that we'd only recruit internally from now on, but across the whole council. And then we also agreed that we'd include the new key worker role, and we'd recruit across children and families and adult social care, the whole task force, and they would be remunerated. And we'd also increase a team that we had called humanitarian assistance champions, and they help us plan. They would help activate the crisis support team, and they also would support the humanitarian assistance lead officer. So that small team of champions really add resilience to our human aspects capability in our council. And then a bit later in 2023, we had the Sudan crisis with lots of people being repatriated through our airport. And this really added momentum and justification that we were doing the right thing. So we'd keep the identity of our crisis support team for Essex, but expand its remit. So we got some really supportive social care directors on board who helped us write the agenda items needed to take to the leadership team meetings and managed to get everything agreed with funding of £6,000 a year. We also reviewed our plans and procedures to incorporate that key worker role. So we had the agreement and we had the plan, so we just needed to build our new team. So that takes me on to how we recruited. So we did lots of promotion events. We worked with our internal communications team. We did online drop-in sessions, a 2-hour session with a subject matter expert. We had slides that could be inserted into presentations at meetings. We also had posters on our intranet, newsletters, we attended meetings, and we used our existing human aspects champions to do a lot of word of mouth. We also approached adult social care workforce ambassadors to help us with our recruitment design. We wanted to get the right word in to help us recruit the right type of people. So Annabelle Butcher, I just invite you to come in here because you're a workforce ambassador, aren't you?
Yes, I am. And I think one of the things that you wanted from the workforce ambassadors was to really get the kind of the voice of the employees in Essex within Essex. So, you know, what sort of questions they would be asking about the volunteers, what sort of how it would fit alongside their day job really, and kind of, you know, how they could balance the two things together.
Yeah, thank you. So when you think of where you are and then where you want to be, it can seem quite an overwhelming task. So we broke it into phases. So this slide shows our recruitment, selection and training process across the timeline. So we already had a recruitment and selection process for the multi-agency crisis support team before it was brought in-house. And that did seem to work well. And it was a tried and tested model. So we thought we'd use that again. And we had over 100 people apply to either be a crisis support worker or a key worker. And then through the drop-in sessions and the subject matter expert session, we had some drop out. They realised the nature and intensity of the role wasn't for them. We then invited people to send in an application form where we asked for quite a lot of details. Everyone had to have a 30-minute one-to-one sort of mini interview, and a few more dropped out. And we also had to turn some down. We sought references. Some needed DBS checks. We sought line manager consent. And again, some more dropped out or were turned away. And this was mainly because they either couldn't be released from their normal work due to the nature of their day job. Some didn't live in or close to Essex. Some had family commitments where they couldn't drop everything at a minute's notice, for example, at 2 o'clock in the morning. So out of that 100, those that successfully completed the application process were then invited to the training. And they had the option of attending a 3-day in-person training course run by myself with some subject matter experts and guest speakers, and then of a 1 in-person day together with the BASW hosted online university course, the Social Work in Disasters course. So they had the choice. And then the Human Aspects Champions could attend that training together with an additional 3-day in-person training course. So I now invite Caroline in to talk about getting the right people for the role.
Thank you, Emma. So part of the process that we went through in terms of getting the right people for the role was really thinking about, from a social care perspective, that they would have the time and the ability to be deployed, and that wouldn't impact too significantly on their workforce, but also knowing that the training would help them and also feed back into their own role during so that the training they had would actually enhance their practice within their social care role. We made a decision that we were going to recruit across ECC, and that we would then Emma would do one-to-ones with each of the people to look at what would be the best fit for them. And so we kind of had a real mix, and we've got people from not only children's and adult social care, but we've got people from, you know, that work in the media, and we've got people that are working in planning. I'm trying to think, we've got all kinds of people, haven't we, Emma, in terms of their skill kind of network. But the one thing that they all had in common was that they had real compassion and real ability to kind of get behind this role, to want to make a real difference to people at time of crisis. And so, yeah, is there anything else you want me to add, Emma, in terms of that?
No, that's absolutely great. Thanks, Caroline. So that brings me on to who are the crisis support team. And I'll just share this screen because it shows the structure. And you can see that social care have accountability and leadership across the strategic and tactical levels. So they head up the scheme. It's led by adult social care in partnership with children and families. We've also incorporated the role of the humanitarian assistance lead officer to make sure they're aware of the capability, and they'd include it when they're doing their multi-agency work chair in the human aspect steering group. At a tactical management level, we've got Caroline, we've got the human aspect champions, and then we'd also use our existing command and control structure in Essex County Council, which is our social care function resilience groups, which are activated in a major incident. So they could deal with any of the issues that comes out from the crisis support team response. At an operational level, we have team leaders. We have some crisis support workers who purely look after the welfare of the team. And we also would have people purely looking at logistics as well, supporting the team leaders, doing shift patterns, for example. Then we have our crisis support workers, and we have level 1 and level 2, depending on their confidence, their availability and abilities. And then we have our social care key workers as well. So you can see in terms of our top 10 human aspects principles, that gives us clear, visible leadership for the team.
Emma, I'm just going to interject this. There was a question that's come through about community support workers, care workers, and whether they can complete the course. And I just sort of added into the chat that we have support workers. We don't just have social workers, do we? So there's a different. Just wondered whether it's worth just adding in a bit about the different levels of experience and qualifications people need.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because as Caroline mentioned, we did agree that we wouldn't just have frontline social workers as our key workers. So we recruited across children, families and adult social care. And I'll just park that for 1 minute because I do have a slide coming up which shows where they come from within those services. So I can talk about that more then. But thanks for that question. In terms of the roles, I've shown that social care lead it on behalf of Essex County Council. We've got Caroline, who is the response lead. So if there was an emergency, she would lead it. However, she is allowed annual leave from time to time. So in her absence, we have a group of social care directors who are on call. So the person on call would be the one who would lead on the crisis support team if needed, if Caroline's not around. We also have someone to help coordinate the crisis support team, and the people that would fulfill that role are our human aspects champions, and we have 11 of those. And then we managed to recruit 25 key workers, 10 from adult social care, 15 from children and families, and we have 42 crisis support workers. About 17 of those are our existing ones from our previous multi-agency scheme. And you can see what we've tried to achieve with the crisis support team for Essex County Council, which is we try really hard to deploy our team as soon as possible, but within 4 hours of an emergency. I mean, we have done it in the past within a much shorter timescale. Everyone will be DBS checked. The aim is to help people and their families, provide advocacy, inform them about their rights. And as Caroline mentioned, it's that compassion that's most important. And for Essex County Council, it's to show people that we do care. And then evidence-based practice suggests a model of psychological first aid is best placed for the first few hours, days and weeks of an emergency, best delivered through a multi-agency approach, including the voluntary sector, us as a local authority, health and mental health authorities, and it can also include the private sector as well, such as transport operating companies like airlines or trains. So medication and therapeutic practice such as counselling, is deemed not appropriate in those first few days and weeks. And so we work well within the National Institute of Clinical Excellence guidelines. Both crisis support workers and key workers are trained to deliver psychological first aid and crisis support. And that includes activities that promote calm, safety, connectedness, self-efficacy and hope. Whether it's a listening ear for people who want to talk, help navigate support services, but that's not just giving people a whole list of websites to have a look at, it's actually facilitating that support with them and being there to offer compassion and kindness when people are suffering. And then key workers have additional responsibilities, so they can deliver the same as a crisis support worker, but they have an enhanced role around safeguarding, identifying vulnerable people, being the eyes and ears of Essex County Council to know when a more formal social care response is required. They can use their vast networks and experience to know what support is required and how to access it. And also that important role of helping at an operational level with financial assistance. And we've followed the key worker role profile in your joint statement. We've referenced it in our plans. So these are the photos from the training we held over the summer. The team bonded really quickly. I mean, after the first day, they were organising paddle boarding. Some had arranged to meet for breakfast the next day. And I think that's really important. What we've tried to do in Essex is to build a team rather than just focus on them as individuals. I'll just show you the next slide, which shows where they're recruited from, which will help answer that question. So I hope this does help answer that question. You can see from this slide the numbers, again, that I mentioned. The PCG is our planning coordinating group. So we meet quarterly to plan for the scheme and maintain it. And then you can see who make up the social care key workers by the role they do. So you can see it's really diverse. And I'll invite Nicola now to talk about how we worked with our social care leadership teams to get the agreement on who can be a key worker, if that's all right, Nicola.
Yeah, of course, Emma. Yeah, so we really viewed it as very important that we got senior level buy-in to this, obviously to recognise the sort of statutory responsibility that we actually do have, but also we were very aware that should we need to deploy this capability, it would have an operational impact on being able to do the day-to-day work alongside the deployment of the capability. And also that we were very aware that managers need to be aware of the impact that engagement in this kind of activity can have on key workers, and therefore be supportive of them coming back into their roles and having the support that they need to continue to work safely. So yes, we spent quite a lot of time just doing the initial groundwork, meeting with key directors, explaining the role and really getting them on board with the concept. I have to say it wasn't all that challenging, because there's definitely a good buy-in and the team have good reputation in Essex. There's quite good awareness of them, so we were sort of pushing an open door there, but we still took the time to do the groundwork. So we ended up going to our functional leadership team, so that's the senior leadership team in children and families, on 2 occasions. Firstly, just talk about the general concept, to get the financing agreed and to agree the recruitment, and secondly to sign off our remuneration policy as well and get buy-in to that. And in addition, we also went to some further forums. So we have a service manager forum that meets every 2 months. So we went there to provide a presentation and also did some networking in our team manager forum as well. And this was across children and families, but we're very keen that there was joint buy-in across both children and adults. So a similar process also happened on the adult side as well with my counterpart.
Thank you. I'll just talk a little bit more about how we train them. So as I mentioned, we had a series of training events. Over the summer, key workers tended to opt for the 1-day in-person training day with the online option. And then the crisis support workers and human aspects champions attended the 3-day person training. We've got a learning and development guide, which covers the type of skills we seek, learning objectives, and we give reading lists and wider learning. Everyone receives a recruitment pack. We thought it was really important to let people know what they were signing up to, letting themselves in for what to expect and what they needed to do next. People have to sign up to a volunteer agreement. And as I mentioned, the in-person training was really engaging. One of the things people took away was stay in your lane, and I thought, Caroline, you might be good to mention that, because I know that stuck with you.
Oh, sorry, I was trying to get my mute button off, and then it wouldn't come off there. Yeah, in terms of kind of one of the things that really resonated with me, and I know did kind of with other people, is kind of, you know, sticking to kind of your role within a response and how helpful that is to people to remember, and so that there isn't that kind of conflict with other kind of people or stepping on other people's roles or boundaries. So it just kind of for me was something that really how can we make sure that we stay within the remit and don't step kind of outside of that, because that can be confusing for people.
Thank you. And at some point we'll carry out a piece of work to find out whether the key workers have finished the online training, and we'll ask them for some feedback, which we're happy to share. At the moment, we're not putting a pressure on with a deadline, because we currently, with our adult social care colleagues, we have a CQC inspection currently underway. So I'll probably do that piece of work in the new year. And then this slide shows the other training that we've done with the crisis support team over the last nearly 20 years. And this is the type of training which we'll offer to keep the enthusiasm and momentum going, and also either as refresher training or upskilling our crisis support team. And I think the important thing is as well is we try to do our in-person training as much as possible to help form that teamwork and those important bonds. So I mentioned psychological first aid. We do follow 2 good practice models with our training as much as we can. One is Hobford's Principles of Resilience, or psychological first aid. That's dated 2011, so we've been using that for several years. And then the other model is a newer one, which was created by the Tim Parry Jonathan Ball Peace Foundation. They presented to our key workers on their one-day training day on this model, and we had a survivor talk about her experience. And what we found was, with previous social care responses, they often go in at the final stage of this model, which is engagement, and sometimes the other stages aren't missed. And I haven't got time to go into the actual model itself, but if anyone's interested in this, do get in touch. But they really like this model. Annabelle, you were on the training, weren't you, for the key workers? And it really is relevant, isn't it, to the role of a key worker?
Yeah, really, really relevant, because I think it's kind of linking the skills that we already have in our day jobs, really, and looking at what we know, but also how to apply it in terms of kind of that practical support, advice and information, everything, but also kind of really that sort of trauma informed support. I think it just tied it all together, really, to be honest, and the kind of the opportunity to speak to somebody about their lived experience was really was so fundamental, really, to be honest, because it just shows you where there's things that just sometimes just get missed about kind of picking things up really early on in that person's journey, and really being able to kind of offer the support and signposting, really, isn't it? And about just recognizing the impact of things on them.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. And I think as well, you can see from the comments that the training was really well received, and it also provided valuable transferable skills, which Caroline talked about earlier. People have come back to say they're actually using, especially what we train around a people-centered approach, they're really using that as their day jobs. And this also helps keep our line managers happy, that they're a member of this team, and that any minute they could go and they'd have to help with the backfill of their role. So it keeps them on board knowing that they're getting things out of being a member of this team. And then we had a really timely opportunity with a live exercise where we could offer the opportunity to our existing crisis support workers and key workers and new recruits a chance to practice their skills. They either acted in role play as survivors or families of those missing, injured or killed, or they could practice their actual role. And we also tested the crisis support team management as well. So I'll invite Caroline first to talk about her experience, and then Annabelle.
Yeah, it was a really good opportunity for learning, and I got the opportunity to practice and put into action the activation process, what that looked like, what that would feel like, and doing all the logs around that. And I think it also gave me an opportunity to go and observe and just think about actually what could we take away from this? What could we add into our scheme for other incidents, but also what didn't work quite so well, and actually we needed to make sure we strengthened that. So it was a really good opportunity in terms of thinking about the activation, having the discussion with the silver officer, deploying the briefings, and how that all filtered down and worked in kind of real time. Really, it was great.
Thanks. And Annabelle, you actually practiced your role as a key worker, didn't you?
Yes, I did, and that was fantastic to have the opportunity to kind of almost get yourself completely put on the spot. We were working blind, as you would have done in a normal crisis. We've been given a sort of a remit. We've been given a really brief overview of what the situation was, but like a real event, you know, it was missing lots of lots of parts of it that you had to kind of really just work with what you'd got. And it was that we had survivors who were, you know, there was role play that gave you, you know, you didn't know what people were going to be saying, how people were going to be responding, what they needed. It was about really thinking about the very practical, you know, from the beginning of the really practical initial steps when you've got somebody who is in a situation and they're scared, they don't know what to do, they don't have anybody around them, to the kind of also the logistics of working in a multi-agency arena where you've got we had sort of the Red Cross, the volunteers, we had the police, we had other professionals, so it's kind of really linking in. And I think going back to what Caroline was saying about, and you were saying about staying in your lane as well, about being really you know, it's quite key to think about what's your role in that situation and what's the role of the other people that are there, and then working together to kind of, and to try and not let the process take over from the human aspect of the crisis, because it's you know, linking it back to sort of that being really person-centered and all the things that we probably know, but when you're in a crisis situation sort of get confused, because you're trying to think about the paperwork and the process and the things that you know you need to do, and then you've got somebody who's very upset and a situation that you don't know what's going to happen next, and it's about having to sort of fit all of those things together but keep the person right at the center. It was just so useful to kind of put that training into a scenario where you could actually say, this is what it's going to be like. We're not going to have the answers to everything. It was, you know, and as we've sort of been saying, it didn't always, not everything worked, and some things could have been done differently, but it was the fact that that's probably the way it's going to be in a real situation. And how do you then deal with that?
Thank you. And we work with our Essex Resilience Forum partners, saying if ever you have a live exercise, please do get us involved, because it's really useful for us as a practice and be part of that multi-agency response. So I just quickly go through how it's activated and managed. And again, this is a busy slide, so you can have a look at it in slower time, but this is our activation process. And I've just shown this to you because it just shows that we have a process that we go through to make things as simple and easy as possible, so that if it's 3 o'clock in the morning and we're wiping the sleep out of our eyes and trying to get our brains into gear, we've got a checklist and we have people that know what they're doing at the right time. And the whole point is to get the key workers and the crisis support workers out on the ground supporting people as soon as possible. And again, I've mentioned we've got the really important roles of the lead officer, which would be Caroline Knight, or a director of local delivery. And then we also would use our social care function resilience groups to make sure everything's joined up across the council. And we'd also feed it into the multi-agency response through the role of the HALO and the human aspect steering group as well. We have the coordinator role. They're a team of 11 people, absolutely brilliant. I'm not sure if Lorette has managed to join us late. If she can speak now, but no. So Lorette might be able to join us a bit later on, but she's one of our new champions. And just talk about the role of the resources that we have. One of the learnings from previous emergencies is people not having quick access to plans and procedures. So we've developed a SharePoint through Teams where we've put all our documents on. We've got an area where people can see what training is coming up, what dates of meetings are, access to the people who lead on the scheme. We've got a learning and development area with copies of our presentation slides and short videos. and other links. And we even have a recommended disaster book list and a disaster movie list as well, just to add a bit of fun. We also have a chat function to actually help us feel part of a team, and we can update people really quickly on that. And people can also see each other's comments and feedback, so it has that team feel. Our key workers have access to Essex County Council resources and tools to assist with communication, and we're currently looking at the different widgets that are available to assist with communication and the types that we might need in an emergency situation. For peacetime, we've produced a range of leaflets for the line managers of the crisis support workers and key workers, and we also produced one for the families and friends as well. So we've learnt that from a previous response from our crisis support team, that it's important to keep them involved and supportive and know what to expect when their family or friend come back from an emergency and how best to help them. And with the line manager agreement leaflets, I think it's really important for them to feel a collective responsibility of the scheme on behalf of Essex County Council. At the end of the day, they've agreed to release their employees from their normal day job to respond to an emergency. We have some leaflets around welfare. This is really important to us. We know the harm that can be done from deploying people who haven't been trained and aren't the right type of people. We think that if we'd had an emergency and we went out to our Essex County Council employees at the time and said, who can help? We probably would have had those 100 people come back to say, yes, me. But we know half of those wouldn't have been appropriate. And that could have caused more harm to them and also to the type of people they're supporting. So selecting the right people we thought was really important, and then to give them the right welfare support as well. We have a range of coping with crisis leaflets that we can quickly tailor and print and hand out as soon as possible. And we wrote those after some learning from Child Bereavement UK, who we also use for our training. So in order so we can have some time for discussion, I'll just quickly go through the remuneration, thanks and recognition policy that we developed. And this slide just summarises the key aspects of that. We developed this was new. We developed it from learning from previous deployments of social workers in emergencies. And because we deploy from children, families and adult social care, there are different functions in our council. So the payment and the way the payment's done can be different. And we wanted to create a consistent approach. So it helps streamline the process. It bypasses our normal, because we don't have an overtime policy for Essex County Council. So we had to think how we'd deal with that. So it goes straight to payroll so people can be paid as soon as possible. So for responses out of hours, they get remunerated by money into their salary. If it's in hours, they could be remunerated by a one-off payment or a My Reward voucher. And it also is important because it's not just about the money, it's about how to thank them and recognise them properly. And again, there's lots of learning about the timing and the tone of doing that. So Annabelle, again, is one of our workforce ambassadors, and we approached them when we developed this scheme, along with our people consultant, assurance and risk. We had quite a team of people who helped write this policy. So I'll bring Annabelle first as we approach you, didn't we, Annabelle?
Yeah, and I think sort of that was linking into how not just about sort of the sort of financial remuneration, but also whether there were things that could be used towards CPD, you know, Social Work England registration, whether there's ways that people can use some of the learning and training and experience and link it to those two things. We sort of talked about how it would work, you know, what the sort of questions that the employees might be asking, you know, in terms of, you know, how can their manager feel assured that you know the team and their day job isn't going to be at risk for somebody sort of having to not be there and other people having to cover, and what would that look like in terms of the role and things like that. It was useful because it was useful to bring in the sort of the voice of the workforce, really. I don't know if there's anything else, Emma, you wanted me to kind of mention there.
Yeah, no, that's great, thank you. And Nicola, did you want to come in about how we got the agreement from our leaders?
Yeah, so again, we went directly to the functional leadership teams. That's the senior leadership level in both children and adults, just to get sort of recognition of this, and to sort of demonstrate that it is definitely been taking seriously this role. And we haven't done this yet, but we also have another leadership team that goes across the whole of the council called our operational leadership team, and we will also be taking this and sort of an update to that as well, because although the key workers obviously sit within children's social care, adult social care, there are a variety of the other workers who are spread across the council. Those workers are voluntary, and so this wouldn't actually apply, but there are still elements of this in terms of the thanks and recognition, which we would encourage managers to apply for voluntary workers for the scheme as well. So yeah, definitely a lot of senior level buy-in to that, which we saw was really important.
Thank you.
Emma, there's a question in the chat actually, which is time for training funded from own team's budget?
Yeah, so that's part of the line manager consent. So something the line managers had to sign up to if they wanted their employee to be a key worker or crisis support worker is to release them from work, not just in a real emergency, but also for training as well. We do have a corporate volunteering policy across the council where employees can have up to, I think it's 3 volunteering days. So we included that in our capability to say you could use one of those volunteering days to attend the training if it's needed, but we don't expect anyone to have to take annual leave or toil to attend our training. Is that okay? Has that answered the question? So I just got some last key points really. I just wanted to show the screen. So it's not really a sprint to get a key worker role quickly embedded. It's like a marathon. It does take a bit of time, and the more investment you put in at the beginning with the planning and getting the agreement, the smoother the process and the better it is, because we've recruited some absolutely fantastic people. At a first look, you might think it's quite expensive to set it up, but I think when you look at what you save over the long run in just purely monetary terms, I mean, obviously it's the compassion and humanity that's the most important. But we've worked with Anglia Ruskin University, who pointed us to research that said if a young person doesn't get the right support after a trauma, the cost to their life over their lifetime in terms of the support services they're going to need can amount to £1 million. So if you think £1 million per person, this actually is a really good cost-effective option to getting that right type of support as quickly as possible to the right people. And it shows the amount of work that's gone on with the hours and the amount of key decisions that were made about who's going to do what, who to talk to, what we need to do, what resources we need to buy, and how much we're going to spend. So again, happy to answer any questions on those at the end. Again, the busy slide, but you can look at this in slower time, because I thought I'd just summarise the process that it took from start to finish about how we first set off, how we were going to get this embedded in the council, and then where we are now. And I must say it's been really enjoyable, actually. It's been one of the highlights of my career, probably. In terms of the tips, I'll leave this for questions, but I just put a few that we found really helpful in terms of using the skills across the council and across the social care workforce, getting top level buy-in, having a ring-fenced budget, things that have really helped us be able to adopt that recommendation in your joint statement. And we have experienced some obstacles as well. The time it takes and the tenacity and keep going. We've had a lot of obstacles, but we had our vision, where we wanted to be, and we've managed to get there. Capacity and funding, I think things are really tough for local authorities at the moment. There's lots of competing priorities. So we've had to acknowledge that and work with it rather than against it. Turning people down, that's really hard, but if they didn't meet our criteria, then we did have to let them down. And also believing in it. I put that on there because some people just think that the human aspects of emergencies can be done by the voluntary sector. And it does have a really valuable role. We work with them, we value them. They're a major part in emergency response and planning in Essex. But there is a role for the local authority in this. And we do believe in the crisis support worker and the key worker role in accepting our responsibility for the well-being of our communities. So it's something that we did believe in. Like I say, we did have our vision. Okay, so I'll stop there. I do have the key highlights as well as for slides if you want to look at them in slower time, but I think it's now time for some questions.
We had a question in there, Emma, about special clothing, and I've just said that we've got a high-vis jacket and lanyards. It's really about just being easily identified in a crisis, really, isn't it?
Yeah, and we have got a white polo shirt with the logo on and a fleece as well. So our existing crisis support workers have those, and we're just now in the process of arranging that for our new recruits as well.
And that is really about making them feel part of the team, part of the response, and have that identity, really, as well as being kind of easily visible when we're kind of in a crisis. I was just going to add there, Emma, that I think the other thing that has been really important in this journey is that we were initially, I guess we were quite anxious, quite nervous about what would happen when the multi-agency crisis support team ended. And it actually gave us such a great opportunity. At the time, we didn't know what it was going to look like. But now looking back, it gave such a good opportunity to reinvent, recreate, and actually come up with something that is amazing. But one of the key things in that has been Emma having that constant oversight and drive and passion to really make this scheme as good as it can be. So I think that's really important. Somebody, Maris, with their hand up.
Yeah, really, really fantastic presentation, and really good to hear all the excellent work that's taking place. So I'm National Director for BASW England, and Emma and I and colleagues have been working together very closely. So thank you to all of you for that rich presentation. I just wanted to ask, there's been a really strong theme in the 20 years legacy of your senior leadership buy-in. And a number of organisations come to us where there may be challenges in terms of some very practical issues about release and capacity of time, even for staff to do CPD. So I'd be interested to hear a little bit more about, throughout that journey, how you've maintained that. And if there have been obstacles, let's be transparent about it. But where has that drive come from really for this? Because it's fantastic.
Wow, I mean, I can answer that, but I'm sure others might like to answer it as well. Like I say, we were astounded when we got 100 people who were interested in applying for this, because what we were hearing was, we're really struggling, budgets are restricted. But I feel like people just accepted the responsibility that Essex County Council has a role to play to support people in emergencies, and the right people are us. So it was a real belief. And I can honestly say, it makes me proud to go to some of the meetings I've been to with our leaders, because they did really embrace it. And I think it also helped. I mean, it's always unfortunate when you have a real emergency, but it does help, because when you've lived through a real emergency and you've had those real-time lessons, it does help leaders make the decision to know what needs to be done. Sometimes I think if a local authority hasn't been involved in a real emergency for a time, there can be some complacency. But when you've had an emergency, and we did have, response to Ukraine, Sudan crisis, and we had some other emergencies as well in the council, it did show how important humanitarian assistance is. So that did help us, I think. It was just the right timing. And in terms of keeping momentum, I mean, I sent out invitation yesterday to attend a children in emergencies training session that we're developing for March. And well, it was less than just a few hours. We've already filled up the spaces, and a lot of them are from social care. So there is a real desire to be involved in this team, which is great, and there's support from the line managers.
I'd say that we also did some work where we went round to kind of senior leaders and presented to them, kept them in the loop, made them understand what the ask was, and some of those senior leaders are part of the crisis support team, they're key workers. And so I think having that and having people that were doing that role within the senior leadership has really helped as well, people kind of get on board. And I don't feel like we have had much resistance from the workforce. And, and I think there's been acceptance, actually, this is a really good thing to be part of. But it is that bit about also us making sure that people are able to take the skills that they learn within the crisis support team and the key worker role back to their own role. And I think people are seeing the value in that as a trauma-informed organisation. So I think it's, it's been really good.
I would echo that, and I think there was some of the conversations that have come out of some of the training is that we've had some of the crisis we have had. I was thinking of the Sudan crisis, Emma, where actually a lot of the work that was done would have come through to the social work teams anyway. Some of the people that we were supporting, that we would have been supporting those people anyway. So it's really just starting that work early, and actually some of that kind of information, signposting, support and guidance at the very beginning through our crisis support team actually probably helps the ongoing support and intervention that we're going to be needing in those situations that would come to the teams anyway. I think the managers see the connection and the benefit of that.
Are there any other questions for us while we're here?
Emma, it's Liz. There's just a question in the chat about the research that you mentioned. I think it was probably the Investor Save, where you were talking about the fact that a young person that maybe hadn't had the right trauma support at the time, the costs that would then be in terms of trying to support them later on. Is there something that you can signpost those in the room to, please, or pop in the chat or send to me later?
Yeah, something I might be able to send later. That was through our so before, when our crisis support team was multi-agency, we had quite a lot of partners from the Essex Resilience Forum as part of our planning and coordination group. One of those members was a professor of public health, and he was the one who always at the meetings gave really useful research and helped make it evidence-based rather than just a good idea. So I know that came from him, but in order to get that actual piece of research, I'd have to contact him and find out.
Thanks, Emma. I mean, that's a really important point, isn't it, about that multi-agency approach and the role of public health as well within planning and thinking about disaster work and some of the kind of considerations about the information that our colleagues hold that we may not realise or recognise the value of that. So that's a really, really important point. Thank you. Yeah, if it's possible to get hold of that, that'd be great. Thank you. I can see another question in the chat from Andrew as well. Which is, has learning from the Grenfell inquiry proved useful in team development?
Yeah, I can give an overall yes. I mean, we've been looking at the latest report that's come out from the Grenfell inquiry. Because I've been involved in this line of work for so long, I find it really hard to read because in some ways you see the same things happening again and again in emergencies. The same mistakes are made, but you also see a lot of really good learning as well. So we know from Grenfell there was a lot of things that didn't go so well, but there was also some things that did go well. So we've been really poring over those reports, learning as much as possible. But before those reports came out, I was keeping abreast of the public inquiry. I work a lot with the London colleagues, so I was hearing about that learning firsthand before the sort of outside of the public inquiry anyway.
Thanks, Emma. Any other colleagues want to comment on that? Caroline, Annabelle, Nicola?
I was just going to back that. I think some of the learning from that there were some specific recommendations in there about the role of key workers and about some of the sort of the failures about the way in which those social care staff either were or weren't deployed in that situation, and that was definitely some of the sort of the sort of evidence that we used to support the case when we were going to functional leadership teams, and we are also intending to take that learning also to our operational leadership team as well, just to ensure so for corporate understanding of that as well.
Thanks, Nicola. I think one of the things, just reflecting on the information that you'd shared throughout the presentation, was it was great to see how you've developed the information hub and the SharePoint site, and also some of the information sheets that you've been developing, particularly thinking about people's communication needs, a range of communication and accessible needs there, and the reasonable adjustments that need to be made to make sure that everybody is getting information in ways that they can understand and make sense of. And again, that was something that came through quite strongly in the Grenfell reports about the lack of accessible information for the particular communities that the area was serving. So that's really positive to see how you've translated that learning into the work that you've done as well. Bianca's asking, would you be able to make some of your resources available to those joining the session today?
Yeah, we're happy to share what we have.
Great. That's wonderful, Emma. Yeah, if you could maybe send the links over to myself and Beth, and we can make sure that they're disseminated to anyone that's joining today. We've also put some links in. You were making reference to the BASW resources, which is fantastic, about how they've been integrated into the training and the work that you're doing. So I've popped a link to the joint statement with ADASS, which has the recommendations around the key worker role and the halo role that you mentioned as well, Emma. So please do have a look at those. There's also a link to the online training as well, which is free to access. It has been designed with the social worker role in mind, but it can be adapted. And I know that you said that had very much been adapted in terms of supporting your social care staff that are involved in emergencies as well, to gain from that learning. So please do use those resources as well. Any other questions from anyone in the room, or comments?
I just say thank you for having us, and I suppose the proof's in the pudding. If we are unfortunate enough to have an emergency, when we actually deploy this sort of newly invigorated team, you know, whenever we have the training, when we say goodbye, we always say, I hope we don't ever have to see you again, you know, other than on training, because unfortunately it means that something horrible's happened and people are suffering.
I think that's really important, and the support, and you mentioned as well about the welfare of everyone that's involved in responding to disasters is absolutely key, and you've clearly thought a lot about that and about the support mechanisms that you've got in place for staff, which is really important as well, isn't it? That element of self-care, but also about the local authority taking care of employees as well. So some really great resources that you talked about there, and approaches as well. And I think the model that you mentioned as well, Emma, is really important for people to have a look at, the sense model, and just reflecting again on, you know, the real importance sometimes of taking that stand back and just observing and really considering what it is that people need at that particular moment in time as well. Bianca's just put another question. We're at time, Bianca, but just quickly, I'll be interested to how you link with the educational psychology service in the critical incident team. So if there's any commentary or information you could provide on that, Emma and colleagues, or if that's something we can follow up outside of the forum today.
And I know that we also had some experience of having to kind of really use that when there was an incident with a bus with some school children that we were deployed to. And so actually that kind of proved really valuable, didn't it, Emma? And so actually Emma can, you know, I'm sure we'll be able to share some more on that kind of outside of this.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, we're at time. It's gone really, really quickly, and there's such a wealth of information in terms of your journey, and it's been really valuable to hear that, and to really hear about, you know, all of the work that's happened, all of the learning, and how that's continued to develop the service. And as Maris was highlighting before as well, the senior leadership buy-in that's absolutely key to supporting the work you're doing, recognising the valuable contribution that everybody is making across Essex to this work is absolutely fantastic to hear. So I'm sure that everybody in the room would want to give you a round of applause and say a huge thank you for giving up your time to come and share your experiences, learning and journey with us today. We hope to invite you back again. It's fantastic to be working in partnership with yourself, Emma, and other colleagues. Please keep in touch, pop your email addresses in the chat so that we can follow up with you, and it'd be great to keep the connection going with everybody in the room. And once again, a huge thank you to colleagues in Essex, to you, Emma, and to Caroline, to Annabelle, and to Nicola as well. And yeah, look forward to future opportunities to work together.